So Bill, did you want me to go into talking about municipal planning and management?
If you want to touch on it briefly, that's fine. I know the task force has come together on a county level
Mm-hmm.
in Grand Isle, but if you wanted to touch on it for a little bit, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just try to say a few things because you covered a fair amount in your presentation, but so this is something that it's important for municipalities to be thinking about, because municipalities are responsible for the trees that are in the public right of way. And so what that largely means is coming up with plans for how you're going to be dealing with the costs of either injecting the trees that you want to preserve, or removing the trees that need to be removed. And so, what we've seen is that there's kind of three different strategies that municipalities around the country have been using. And I saw that one of the questions in the chat was, how do we know that these, the term that was used was mitigation strategies work, if we know that, almost 99% of the ash are going to be killed. Well, the reason that we know that almost 99% of the ash trees will be killed by emerald ash borer is because Vermont is the 35th state to have this. So we have the experience of the 34 states that came before us and have been dealing with this from 2002. So we know both the extent to which the borer impacts the trees, and we also have been able to learn from other states' experience in trying to address the impact. And the one sort of caveat to that is that Vermont does have sort of more topography than the states in the Midwest. And so we don't know as well how our hilly environment will impact the spread. And we also have a much higher amount of white ash. And there has been some recent research that shows that white ash does seem to have a little bit more either tolerance or resistance to the pest. But what we have seen is that municipalities have sort of taken three different approaches to dealing with this. One is, going in ahead of time and just cutting all of the trees, removing or treating with the insecticide everything before the pest comes in, so that they don't have to worry about what the economic impacts might be down the road as the trees die. At the other end of the spectrum, there are towns that wait and take a wait and see, and they're very concerned that they won't be able to handle the economic costs of taking down the trees, and so they don't do anything. And unfortunately, once the trees start to die, because they are so brittle and dangerous to remove, that reactive stance ends up costing more in the long term. And in between is what we're calling selective management, where you identify the trees that you want to take out first, and you take them out in stages. And sometimes that means treating some trees, not because you're intending to treat them forever, but because the insecticidal treatment will allow you to buy some time so that your diseases. So that's kind of delayed management.
Could I just weigh in? I'm not sure if I mentioned this during my portion of the presentation, but both South Hero and Grand Isle taxpayers have approved line item budgets in the amount of $10,000 per year to deal with ash tree removal, the preemptive removal. And also the towns are coordinating with Vermont Electric Co-op. So for example, this year, Vermont Electric Co-op is scheduled to do wine clearing in the town of South Hero. So the town of South Hero is coordinating ash removal with Vermont Electric Co-op wine clearing efforts in order to reduce some costs. So that's just thought
Yeah,
it might be interesting.
I I would just like to say that the islands, I think, are incredibly fortunate in that you have this task force. The work that the task force has done um, has, although you have the infestation now, you are worlds ahead of many other communities in Vermont. And I think that there are lots and lots of municipalities that are looking to what the Islands Task Force has been doing as a model. And everything that you're doing is really, really impressive and kind of like best practices. So it's very exciting to see that. So I'm going to need somebody to keep me on time here, but I did want to add that one, there are two insecticides that Vermont is recommending for use, and they are emamectin benzoate and azathrozactin, which is neem derived and organic, and I can never pronounce it. And the reason why they recommend these two is because they have the lowest and least impact of all of the insecticides that you can use for emerald ash borer on non-target species. So we don't want to be harming our pollinators who are already so stressed. And these two insecticides have the least impact on non-target species. And the emamectin benzoate, it is possible for individuals to become certified pesticide applicators and to use that. It's best if it's somebody who has a really good understanding of trees, because even arborists, like there was a town in Connecticut that invested thousands of dollars in getting their trees injected, but apparently the trees were already so far gone that with an EAB infestation, that even after using the insecticide, because they did it too late in the infestation, it didn't preserve the trees. So there are some towns that have gotten people, like if they have a staff, an arborist on staff, they've been using that person to inject the trees, and that can help save some money. So as Bill mentioned, the islands have been working on doing inventories. That's incredibly important because you can't manage what you don't know that you don't have. So this is just an example of some different ways. You can either use a fancy app or just a paper one. So this is just some information about the treatment, which Bill already went over. And I'm just going to give you maybe a couple little slides about why this is something that municipalities really need to think about, is that when the trees start to become brittle, they die in really unpredictable ways. They will just shatter mid-stem sometimes. And so you start to see in ice storms and windstorms these trees coming down. And Bill mentioned that you're working with the utility companies. The utility companies are responsible for the trees that could hit their lines. So they are starting to take down trees all around the state, but they're starting in the areas that have been first detected as being infested. So they're starting in central Vermont and in the islands, but it is going to be a big financial pressure for them. And what they're doing in most cases, I don't know if this is what they're doing in the islands, is chipping and leaving the wood on site. So, and then I guess Bill, have the islands determined a an area for wood disposal?
Yes, so each community has established an area to if a homeowner needs to dispose of um, ash, chunk wood or whatever. Each community has established a location. Um, Several of the communities have it at their transfer stations, and the wood has to stay there for 2 years, and then after 2 years, it can be bucked up and used as firewood. And to coordinate the delivery of wood to the various concentration yards in each community, you have to go through your town tree warden, who then talks with the local road commissioner to coordinate that. To date, we've had no one take advantage of that. The tree service companies that have come in are chipping most of the wood. And I dare say that probably a few of the tree service companies are actually moving some of the wood, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so we're trying to keep it local. First course of action is, burn it yourself if you can, use it. If not, give it to a neighbor. And then if the tree service can't deal with it in a responsible manner, then yes, each town has a spot where it can be left for 2 years and then used as fuel wood.
Okay, great.
So Ginger, it is 8:15. I just want to check in. We were planning on finishing at 8:30. I want to make sure we had time for a little bit of questions. Is there anything else that you want to get through really quick? Or are you okay to get to questions?
I am fine with questions.
Okay. And yeah, we'll see how many we have. So I have about 7 or 8 questions in the queue. So I'll go through those. If folks have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So we will try to finish at 8:30, but if any of the speakers are able to stay later and we have questions, we can do that. And if you have to leave, I will save the questions and we'll send those as a follow-up. So question we had earlier, it may have been answered, but are foresters recommending harvesting now before infestation? And is there a market for ash these days?
Is Nancy able to, is she back on in any form, audio or?
Nancy, can you, are you available?
Can you hear me here?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been having real trouble hearing anybody else, but I heard this question. So as far as harvesting now, I don't know if Ginger was able to cover this at all, but there is no urgent need to harvest before you've set out your options, put together a strategy. There continues to be a market for ash, but we strongly recommend that if you're in current use, it would be a requirement to maintain ash on the landscape. We don't want to cut all of our ash trees. That would be as bad as the emerald ash borer. So what we want to do is to make sure that we have an opportunity for that lingering ash or that resistant ash to represent in our landscape. And so if you have a great of ash, 20% or more ash in your landscape, then you might want to reduce the amount of ash that you have. If you're nowhere near an infestation, if you're not in an infected area, you have 10 years, 20 years maybe to let your trees grow. So you want to make sure that you keep that ash on the landscape as long as possible. Maybe someone can let me know whether you've heard everything I've said or not.
So we actually did hear that, Nancy. That was you came in perfectly there. Thank you.
Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think that was a really great answer. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not the person that asked it, but it definitely sounded good to me. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but there were a lot of questions about water quality. So I wanted to kind of ask a couple of those back to back. Question from Ken, waterfront properties cannot remove trees over 4 inches in diameter that are within 250 feet of the water. So is there a protocol for ash in that zone? And then Carol also asked, what is the shoreline, or with the Shoreline Protection Act, how do we cut trees that are within distance from Lake Champlain? So kind of like related questions. And then from someone else, is there town or state permission needed to cut down trees? So I guess a couple questions. So there are state, town restrictions for dealing with ash trees.
So let me see if I can try to answer that. So the Shoreline Protection Act does allow people to take trees down that are a hazard, but not until they are a hazard. If you reach out to the Department of Environmental Conservation, there will be someone there that could come out to your site to discuss what you should do if you are ash is there within the shoreline zone. You may be able to plant trees or take trees down slowly, depending on whether they're a hazard to any existing building. So you really do need to reach out to the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Okay, excellent. So another couple of questions there. From Brian, have any of these mitigation methods actually worked in other parts of the country? Is there anywhere that hasn't lost all or 97% of their ash trees?
Well, I don't know if Nancy's still on, but I know there are pockets of lingering ash out in the lake states, and I think that's really associated with white ash. And if Nancy may want to weigh in as well. And there's a lot. Go ahead, Nancy.
I can try to do that. Yes, so mitigation efforts in terms of any of the insecticide, that certainly does work. In terms of forest management, as was mentioned before, there are pockets of ash, primarily white ash, that have 100% or close to 100% survival rate in and amongst a sea of dying ash, perhaps green ash primarily. I think it was mentioned somewhere that black ash is the most susceptible, green ash next, and white ash has more of an opportunity for resistance. And it seems to be those very large diameter, big crowned, healthy, best site trees that are actually making it. So forest management certainly works to maintain some ash on the landscape, also to keep the seed source available while we're learning more and more about emerald ash borer and how to control it. So we really want to maintain ash on the landscape, regeneration that will grow into a tree to produce seed. So yes, those mitigation efforts have worked and can continue to work.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Another question from Jane. Does the injection really save the tree?
Yes. It certainly does. It's very, very effective. The injection of the insecticide works. It kills the larvae.
Awesome. Love it when it's an easy answer. From Carol again, is there another fungus killing ash trees?
There are all kinds of things that are causing mortality of ash. We have ash yellows, which is prevalent throughout the region. There's also site-specific issues that affect ash. Drought and too much water sometimes. So ash really requires a very high fertility, so that it grows really well. And then if there's a lack of water after the tree gets older, they can die from a couple of years of drought. So there are all kinds of reasons that ash actually does suffer mortality. And that's why we have to be so careful that we're actually identifying what we're seeing. There's also a fungus called white patch fungus that looks quite a lot like the bark flecking from the woodpecker. So that's another issue. If you think you're seeing the bark flecking, please call the department and we'll come out and take a look. Sometimes it's the white patch fungus, which doesn't actually harm the tree.
Awesome, great. And I will, just as a reminder, I'll send out the contact info for Nancy, Ginger, and Bill in an email to everyone who registered on Eventbrite. So you'll get everyone's contact info, and if you do want to follow up with any of the speakers, I'll send that to you. If you want it in the chat too, let me know or let one of them know, and they can put it to you right now over chat. Okay, we just had just a couple more questions from Edward. I have about 30 ash trees in a park, in a park-like spread, excuse me, of my front lawn, perhaps 250 more in an adjacent wooded area. I've already planted 10 new trees, anticipating dead ash. Will the state have some sort of tree replacement program that will provide low-cost replacement trees?
Okay, because the ash, there's millions and millions and millions of ash trees that have died across the country. There's no real program to replace the ash. In a forested situation, there is some opportunity occasionally to work through the NRCS program. If you are planting trees that provide mast for wildlife, and some of those trees could be any of the oaks, and oak trees are a particularly good replacement tree for ash. Bur oak, swamp white oak does a really good job in those same clay soils where ash is grown. So if you have 10 acres or more, it's a possibility you could apply for funding at NRCS. Of course, the money there is also limited, so you would need to rank through the process, and it depends whether you acquire the funds. Other than that, there really isn't any kind of program available for private landowners to plant trees to replace ash.
Guy, if I could weigh in with kind of a tangential answer, at one of our workshops in North Hero, someone asked if insurance companies would provide some financial benefit to homeowners for preemptive removal of ash, knowing that if an ash tree falls, it might cause structural damage to a home or hit a vehicle or cause some form of liability. And in talking with local insurance agents, the answer was no. So there's no insurance funding for preemptive removal of ash trees in anticipation of EAB.
Yeah, our program does have some limited monies for grants for replacement trees, but it's for municipalities, not for individual homeowners.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we just had 2 more questions. We're getting close to 8:30. But if we can get through these 2, from Colleen, is a treated tree marketable in the future? So once it's been treated, can you still sell it?
Yes. So the borer is actually only in the cambium layer just beneath the bark, and the insecticide is injected at the very base of the tree, so that wounding won't affect the log. So if you are treating the tree prior to the insect doing much damage or to cause rot, then it would be certainly marketable.
Nancy, and what's the market for green ash and black ash?
They generally go into the same marketplace except for the black ash. A mill will take it the same way as white ash or green ash, but the value of black ash is much greater if you can work with the indigenous community to supply wood for basket making. And that would be a better value for the black ash, as well as a cultural necessity for our region. Black ash is so important to the tribes all across the northern part of the United States. And if we can help in maintaining that stock of black ash for baskets into the future, it would be a great, great help to us culturally and spiritually.
Good point.
So last question from David Banks. And I think, Bill, you might have touched on this a little earlier with your slide about other types of like lookalikes, but are there other ash borers out there?
I'm going to defer to either Ginger or Nancy on that one.
Yeah, there's a native beetle. It's a native ash borer, and you can tell the difference very, very easily with the galleries. And the native ash borer only attacks trees that are already either dead or nearly dead. They don't kill the tree. They don't actually harm the tree. They're just feeding off of the dead tree. And the gallery is so very different from emerald ash borer. The gallery is a straight up and down line with perpendicular lines coming out of it. So I wish I had a drawing of it right now, but if you can think of one straight line and crossing across the line over and over and over again, that would be what the gallery looks like.
Thank you. Like Nancy, I will actually, I'll see if I can pull up a photo of that really quick, or if someone else can. That's all the questions that we had. So I would just like to thank everyone for being here. Looks like we're wrapping up just about on time. I will put the survey, if folks don't mind, putting in just a 2 or 3 minutes of their time to filling out the survey, just asking us, just writing in kind of how this event went for you. If I can find where I had that survey link, there it is. I'll put it in the chat bar to everyone. So there is the survey link. If you don't mind filling that out. Are there any final thoughts from any of the speakers? Any final words or anything, or any final questions?
I would just like to thank everyone for participating, and if you have an interest in the task force, joining in on some of our projects, then please drop me an email.
And I just wanted to reiterate again that the task force is doing really wonderful work, and you're all just so lucky to have Bill and the rest of the task force in the islands. I will make the slides that I had put together on lingering ash and biocontrols available so that folks can see those.
And just so folks are aware, there are 43 members to the task force, so it's quite a collection of folks that bring a wealth of information. It's a great group to work with.
Awesome. Anything else? Well, great. Well, Bill, Ginger, Molly, Nancy, thank you all so much for being able to take your time to help us learn. I'll send out an email to everyone with all the info. Feel free to email me. You can reach me at guy@shlt.org. I'll put that in the chat. And I encourage other folks, if any of their speakers wants to put their email in the chat so folks can reach out to us. Yeah, I think that's all.
Great. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ginger.
Okay.
Thank you, Molly, Nancy.